Hello and welcome to the new videocast, once again powered by the AR team. My name is Jörg Friedman and I am the Investor Relations Officer and Senior Director for Market Intelligence at Nubank. Today we have a very special guest, Luciana Cairala, who is our General Manager for Open Finance. Thank you for being with us today, Luciana.
Perfect. Hello, Jörg. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's definitely exciting to be talking about open finance with all of you today.
Thank you. And by the way, can we start talking about the definitions of open finance so we can clarify for our audience?
Sure. So Open Finance was launched in Brazil in 2021. It's a quite innovative agenda and it's developing quite fast. It's just completed 3 years, but we have many things already going on. And if I may divide the system, I see that there are two components. The first one, it's the data sharing piece. The customer can share data from different institutions as they wish. That's an opt-in system. That's very important. The customer is in control and he decides what to do with his data. And one thing that is quite interesting about the system in Brazil, it's the granularity of the data that is being shared through the system. So different than other systems, we also have some financial products already integrated in the system. So we have granular data coming from different packages, such as registration data, account data, credit operations, investments, and loans positions. So that makes a really rich system where companies can launch different products and learn even more about customers' behavior. The second component, it's about payment initiation, that it's the ability of starting and concluding a transaction from an app where is not the funds that you want to use for a specific transaction. You are at the Nubank app and you want to use the money that you have at Bank A to bring to Nubank. You can do everything through Open Finance. And one thing that I believe that it's important to highlight that this is a public policy agenda. And companies will do what they believe it's best with the data, with the payment initiation. And we at Nu, we always took data very seriously to make all our decisions. So we are definitely doing that. And we are also interacting very actively with the regulation because we want to make sure that we are really shaping a system that is best for the Brazilian population overall.
Lu, you mentioned about data sharing and the opt-in that exists in Brazil. But I think this has recently changed here in the country. So can you elaborate a bit about it?
In the very early days of Open Finance, all the consents, they had a maximum duration of 12 months. And the recent change allows now a customer to decide that the consent has no more expiration date. So we get access to customers' data for as long as the customer wants. It's important to highlight that the customer can cancel the consent at any time, but now they can also choose to leave it valid as long as they wish, like forever. It's not limited to 12 months. And that was actually very important because as our consents started to expire, as we completed 1 year of participating in Open Finance, there were a lot of efforts in renewing those consents.
There are different models of open finance across the globe. Can you help us clarifying the differences versus the UK model, for instance?
UK is actually a very good example. They are the pioneers of launching a system of such magnitude. So definitely a reference for us. And I would say that we were actually very lucky to launch after them because we could learn a lot from everything that was happening in the UK. Technically, API specifications, security protocols, use cases as well. But there are some differences between the two systems, and the first one is in the name. In the UK, we have an open banking system that it's limited to banking products, while in Brazil, we already got to the open finance system. Once we included more products that were not only banking products such as investments. So that's quite interesting to see two big systems performing similarly, but following different ways. And I'm talking about similar systems also in terms of penetration. In both countries, we have about 15% of the population participating in the system, being that sharing data or making a payment initiation. And another interesting fact is that out of the 10 million people participating in the UK system, about 60% performed a payment initiation. And when we compare to Brazil, less than 20% of the open finance customers, if we may say like that, performed a payment initiation. So it's quite interesting to see that we still have a lot to advance in payments, and quite exciting as well.
It's still early days.
Exactly.
And Lu, what are the benefits for customers to adhere to Open Finance?
So one of the main objectives of Open Finance is really to put the customer in the center. And what I mean by that, customers are going to be exposed to more product offers, so they can definitely make better decisions. There is also the possibility of making their financial lives easier once we start to have more and more aggregations of different products in one place. You no longer need to open several apps to only check what is your balance and decide which card you should use for each one of the purchases. In terms of personalization, we have granular data, very, very granular data being circulated in the system. So they tend to receive more personalized offers. And all of that, we are talking about an industry that becomes more competitive. We have data circulating, so there is no longer like information only owned by a player. Everybody can see and use the same information. So competition is definitely one thing that Open Finance brings to the population, and everything with a lot of transparency and safety. And just if you allow me, just to exemplify a bit everything that I'm talking about, I'll just bring an example of a product that we recently launched, that it's the overdraft alert. So overdraft, it's a quite popular product in Brazil. Many people actually use the product, and also interest rates, they tend to be quite high. And at times, we do have some institutions that charge them quietly. And once a customer shares this data with Nubank, what we can do with that? Once we identify that you have a negative balance, we let you know. We send you an alert. And sometimes those customers even have money at Nubank, sitting at Nubank, that they could cover for that. Or sometimes they decide to hire another credit line that is cheaper, with a cheaper interest rate than the one for overdraft. So this is an example, I would say, of better decisions, financial inclusion, competitiveness also in the system. And customers are quite happy about that. Satisfaction rate, it's almost at 90%, 88%. And on average, we managed to reduce in 2.5 days the time that one spends in an overdraft product.
I can tell that I'm a happy customer because you saved me a lot of money on those interactions.
Nice.
So where does Nu stand in comparison to the other banks? You gave this example. So how to do broader comparisons, not only in terms of products, but also in terms of share?
Yes, so Nubank joined the data sharing piece in 2022, a bit later than the system was first launched. And since we joined, we saw a spike in consents. Like we joined the system, there were about 9-10 million active consents. In less than 6 months after we joined, we saw that number doubling, like getting to 20 million consents.
In the system.
In the system, the overall system. Today, Brazil accounts with 45 million active consents. That's a huge number. And we are very, very proud to say that Nubank owns 30% of those consents. 15 million of the active consents in Brazil were Nubank customers sharing external data with us.
Just to put things into context, if I am understanding you correctly, Nubank alone has more consents than the total UK at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great comparison, but of course, populations are quite different. But we were very, very successful in getting customers opt-in. And for me, it translates that into trust. Customers trust that we are getting their data to return benefit to them. And we are with such a great traction that we get like thousands of consents every day. And this number is only increasing. So we are very, very happy and proud about that.
Since you touched upon the theme of safety, security, how do we treat this data, and how do we guarantee that this data is safely stored with us?
Yes. So one point that it's important to understand about Open Finance, we follow the highest standards in terms of security protocols worldwide. A lot of them were actually the ones implemented by the UK. So that's probably one of the most heated agendas when we are at the self-regulation, because we really want to make sure that we are building a system that there is no chances that data is going to be leaked, or that there is going to be data being shared with other parties that are not part of the system. So that's really something that we take very seriously inside Open Finance in Brazil.
You talked about share. We talked about safety. Can we also elaborate a bit more about products, not only that we are operating with, but that we can launch in the future, taking into consideration the leverage and the synergies of open finance?
Sure. So just one thing of context, it's the way we build products at Nubank. Before we launch a product to the whole customer base, what we do, we test a product with a small portion, a small sample of our population. We have more than 100 million customers, so definitely we can have many small samples testing different things. Why is that so important to us? We want to collect as fast as possible feedback from our customers, direct feedback. And we also want to learn how the customers is interacting with our products. We launch a screen and we wanted the customer to use a specific button. And all of a sudden we see that the customer is actually navigating more to actually do the action that we were expecting him to do. We get everything during this phase. We keep iterating the product until we feel that we got to a very good point to keep rolling out to more customers. And that being said, we have more than 10 products currently being tested, built on top of Open Finance. And if I were to summarize what our customers' feedback to that, we do measure the customer satisfaction rate. And all our products are rating between 75 and 90%. That's quite high. Those are the ones that declare that they are even very satisfied or satisfied with the product that they used. And we also apply another methodology to identify product market fit. That is the Sean Ellis score. So we pretty much ask customers, how disappointed would you be if I were to remove that solution from the app? And all those products that I mentioned, we are getting to something very close or even above 50% would be very disappointed if they could no longer use that product specifically. And another 30% would be disappointed. So I believe we are in a very, very good path to actually build products on top of Open Finance and return value to customers.
And Lou, every time that I hear you talking about how we test our products, I remember the culture of foundational testing. But can you also elaborate more about the products we are launching in practice for Open Finance?
So there is the overdraft product that there is a great traction with customers that I just mentioned. There is another one that it's account aggregation that will bring all the balances and transactions of external accounts to the Nubank app. And how we are measuring the success of the account aggregation in specifically, we are measuring number of customers that access that at least twice a month. Why twice? The first time it might be the novelty effect. You just learned there is something new, you want to see what it is, which is great. But if you came back, it's because you actually saw some value on that. And we are very happy that we see millions of customers accessing that experience per month at least twice. So that's really, really good. And following that payment initiation, inside the account aggregation, you have the option to move your money around, right? You see the balances, you see the transactions, you want to bring that money to Nubank. There is an entry point available, so you can simply start the transaction and conclude the transaction through the account aggregation. It's also present in other parts of our app as well. Now going a bit to the insights, we have the idle money insight. So whenever we identify a customer has money sitting in an account for a certain amount of days, and we see that the opportunity to bring to Nubank because the yield would be higher in one of our products such as Caixinhas, Moneybox, we send an alert to customers. And we impacted more than 3 million customers with these alerts. Satisfaction, it's quite positive, very close to 90% again. And just we have other products that are currently being tested, such as the subscription manager, the credit card fee busters, and many others. So it's quite exciting, the product agenda inside Open Finance at Nubank.
And for our foreign audience, Pix was a very important lever for those solutions, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about how Pix interacts with Open Finance?
Perfect. So since Pix was launched, that it was back in 2020, it had a great transformational power. We could see customer behavior changing from night to day. And why? Because Pix, you can perform a transaction at any time of the day. It works 24/7. It only takes seconds to complete that. And also at no charge. There is no cost to perform a Pix transaction. And when we consider the reality before Pix, some institutions were actually charging for that. mostly when the transaction was happening between different institutions. So that was a key differential. And also to highlight, Nubank never charged to do that transactions even before Pix. Now coming back to Open Finance. Open Finance, it's all about empowering the customer to make the best decisions about their financial lives. And with Pix, they can move money freely between accounts all the time without any charge. So I believe that's where Pix meets Open Finance, and definitely building Open Finance, the payment initiation piece specifically. After there was such a system implemented in Brazil, it's a great benefit.
Yeah, I see, for instance, many applications to that. For instance, related to salary portability, right? Maybe this might be another way for you to accomplish portability without needing to go into the usual channels that we know, have a lot of attrition.
Yeah, great points, definitely.
And look, how do you see Open Finance evolving in Brazil?
So first thing, Open Finance, we want that every customer has access to quality products and services. And a customer that is not attached to one institution specifically. The customer has flexibility to compare different products, to decide to shift relationship from one to another bank, even if I hired all my products from institution A, but I really like the UX of Bank B or FinTech B. I can manage all my products from one UX and hire products from another. So that's all about Open Finance. And one thing that is quite interesting that is starting to be developed inside the system are portability mechanisms. We just heard recently that credit portability is going to become part of Open Finance, and the technical discussions are just starting now. So we are quite excited to give even more flexibility to our customers. Everything seems very positive, and in fact it is. Brazil is really getting to a very important place in Open Finance, becoming a reference in many different areas. But of course, there are always some improvement opportunities that we believe that are part of the natural course of such a system with such impactful power that it has. And if we were to say, I believe there are two different elements that we need to focus to improve over time. The first one, it's related to improve the overall efficiency and performance of the system. And what I'm talking about here, conversion funnels. So we do have customers being redirected when they are sharing data or when they are doing a payment initiation. And we see some drops in performance depending on which institution is communicating with the other institution. Just to give you a bit of reference, we do see Nubank that it's the best in class, operating at 20 percentage points above the average of the market. So we know that the central bank is aware of that. It has just been implemented monitoring system where the central bank is going to look very closely to all the players' performance and agree on action plans to make sure that performance is improving over time. And the second point also about performance and efficiency, it's the way we've been sharing data among players. Today, the only way for one player to know if there is new data is actually by requesting the other institution to send the data. Just to translate that into numbers, we are talking about 1.7 billion API calls per week being performed in Brazil. That's really, really a lot. That's why, because that's the only way that I can tell a customer this data is fresh, that use case still makes sense to you. I need to consult all the data. What we are proposing here, that we install technical mechanisms that the institution that owns the data informs the system whenever there is new data. So you only fetch data if there is really a need for that. So we believe that's also important for the performance of the system, and now talking about the technical piece.
Yeah, it reminds me when you talk about customers that have options and they can choose whatever they go, of what David Vélez always says. They will go with whoever treats them best and have best products. So I think this can be a life changer, right?
Definitely. And we hope that Nubank is that place for our customers.
Yes, definitely will. I understand we see great potential in Mexico and Colombia too, where Nubank also operates. So yeah. At what point are open finance discussions in those countries?
So Mexico was actually the first country in Latin America to include open finance and open data into the fintech legislation, the fintech law. So it was very exciting, promising, but right now we are still pending. They define the secondary regulation that it's actually the one that is going to dictate how the system is going to work. When it comes to Colombia, in 2022, they added open finance and open data as mandatory in their regulation. And right now there was a public consultation and they are developing the secondary regulation, mostly focused on the technical and security aspects of that. So we're quite excited to see those two countries also developing open finance.
And coming back to Brazil, to summarize our discussions, how can open finance contribute to our 2024 targets, such as ramping up secured lending, the high income progress, and making the money platform a reality in the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. Open finance, we're talking about granular data coming to us and us getting to know the customer even more. So when we are talking about secured lending specifically, we know what the customer is hiring outside Nubank. We know the products, we know the conditions exactly. So that's actually very good because we can make sure that the products that we're launching here, we are going to get to a good product market fit. Super core and high income. We are learning more about that customers. We are learning their transactions. We are getting a full picture of their financial lives. And that adds a lot to our product portfolio. We can understand what products would stick more to those segments and really launch things that meets their needs. And there is also other attributes that we are learning from the type of operations that they are performing, and might be that there are opportunities for us to develop more in specific areas. It could be credit, it could be the way they manage their investments. So another great contribution to those segments. And when it comes to Money Platform, the end goal of the Money Platform is that we become the private banker for each one of our more than 100 million customers. With open finance, data again coming to our pipes, we can really customize the insights and not only give insights or advices about their financial lives at Nubank, but their full financial lives. And once again, data has been one of the key factors for the Nubank success. We are a very data-driven company. So we do see that with open finance, we are going to the next steps. We are going to get to the next steps of Nubank and also to the next leaps of the Money Platform.
Lu, I learned so much today. Thank you so much for joining us and spending the time to enlighten us about open finance. I hope you all enjoyed and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.